Now let's dive deep into this big LGBTQ story for today. I'm Bishop Darrell Watkins, and let's queer up the USA view. Progressive think tank says we should drop these three phrases immediately to survive MAGA attacks. A progressive-leaning centrist think tank is making headlines by telling Democrats to stop using dozens of common social justice terms, including LGBTQ+ ones. Third Way, a Washington-based group, has released a new memo identifying 45 words and phrases they say are, quote, profoundly alienating, end quote, to voters. Their advice: drop them immediately if Democrats hope to stop the MAGA movement and win over everyday Americans. The list includes phrases familiar to many in our community, terms like cisgender, deadnaming, heteronormative, and even LGBTQIA+ itself. Also on the chopping block are social justice staples such as privilege, systems of oppression, intersectionality, and microaggression. The group memo states, quote, for a party that spends billions of dollars trying to find the perfect language to connect to voters, Democrats and their allies use an awful lot of words and phrases no ordinary person would ever dream of saying, end quote. The group claims that while the intent of this language is inclusion, the effect sounds elitist or enforcers of wokeness. Third Way insists they are not policing speech, but urging Democrats to use words that invite conversation rather than repel voters. The memo adds, quote, standing up to MAGA's cruel attacks on gay and transgender people requires creating empathy and building a broad coalition, not confusing or shaming people who could otherwise be allies, end quote. As the memo is out, critics point out the irony. While Democrats debate dropping words, the current Republican administration has banned more than 250 terms from federal communications, including those acknowledging LGBTQ+ lives, racial discrimination, and climate change. The fight over language is becoming more than just semantics. It's about survival in the culture wars and the 2026 elections. The memo itself is a microaggression. I was angry the minute I came across this story. Because what I hear, now they're trying to do a good thing. I know they're trying to do a good thing, although they have a different definition of progressive than I do. But they're trying to do a good thing. And but what I hear from what they're saying is, we will do better in elections if we'll just go back in the closet. And whether that's the educational closet or the justice closet or the queer closet, if we will just go back if we will assimilate, that's the problem. And this has been going on since the 50s, the in-your-face people and the suit and tie people, and it's always been back and forth. And this is telling us, you people with all of your psychology and sociology and political science, you're killing us. Shut it up a little bit. And I think that's an insult to middle America. I think that's that people don't know what words mean, I'm going to pray for a moment. It is incredible to me that the suggestion seems to be, I had to vote for a rapist because of woke language. That just seems ridiculous to me. I had to support a convicted felon because of acronyms. I had to support a self-admitted predator because of, intersectionality, whatever that is. I had to vote for the guy who incited an attack on the Capitol because, trans. No, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. Assimilation is never the answer. There may be better ways that we can invite conversation. Maybe we should not come up with a new word every 3 days. Maybe we should be more tolerant for people who don't embrace the words. There's lots of rooms for criticism and growth. But to shut down 40 years of evolution is not only not going to happen, it's not the right approach anyway. I have more faith in my neighbors than that. And I would rather be fully who I am out loud all the time and lose elections than to hide just to get more from it. We tried that up until Stonewall, and I'm just not going back.
I get you on that one. It's one of those things where I understand what Third Way is trying to do here, but there's another way to handle this that doesn't involve eliminating language. And quite frankly, a lot of it comes down to simplifying the way that we talk about these issues to average folks. Like, one of the people I think that talks best about trans issues Governor Andy Beshear, the two-term Democratic governor of Kentucky. I remember when he was specifically vetoing a piece of anti-trans legislation that was affecting the schools, he had said, in basic terms, this legislation is about protecting one group of kids from being picked on by another group of kids. We sometimes forget and I'm just going to say it as a Democrat himself, we sometimes forget that we sometimes have to simplify our language to meet people where they are. Like, do people necessarily understand intersectionality or all that stuff when you go into rural West Virginia? No. But if you talk about different backgrounds and how we should all be getting along in a simpler term, you communicate better on through. It's all about knowing your audience and the people that you want to communicate to in order to broaden your base and broaden your coalition.
I find, though, that if you define terms, that helps too. Because people are always telling me, because really our vocabulary is shrinking just across the nation. And so I'll say a word that I learned 40 or 50 years ago, and nobody knows what it means anymore. Well, I don't want to unsay it. I don't want to forget it. So, but if I think it's one of those words, I will explain it. So if I say, I have a hermeneutic of suspicion, and I'll say, what I mean is, I am suspicious of these things, that I don't take it as it comes to me. Well, okay, so if I think that, I do, but I'm not, I don't want to shrink it hurts me that the national vocabulary is shrunk anyway. So, but if I do think I'm using a word that, that they wouldn't know in the 8th grade in West Virginia, I do try to define it and then not maybe overuse it after that. But I don't know. We do have to be clearer, but I don't know that shrinking the vocabulary, which is happening on its own, I don't like that.
I mean, I see this as two distinct groups. We're talking about politicians who are running for office, and we're talking about using it in our own culture. I think using it in our own culture is very different. I think that a lot of times politicians cling to these buzzwords and use them in a way that is off-putting because they're looking to gain favor with different groups. And I do think that overuse of those, if you're not speaking to that community or to a group that's going to understand that, it doesn't ring true to people, especially if you're a politician not speaking from the community. If you're a white cisgender male and you're speaking to a black church, you might have a different approach than if you were a black pastor in a black church. You're going to speak differently. So I think the audience makes a big difference. And I do think that our community, and I've been in a lot of spaces where, we have to also be more forgiving when people don't understand
100%.
what the language means and not use it as a weapon against people.
Exactly.
And there is a big movement of people that do use some of this language as a weapon. If you say LGBTQ and someone says, oh, you didn't say IA, if you misgender someone as on accident, that's very different than purposely misgendering someone. Or, if you're in your speech, you're referring to something. I agree. Tell the story more than the term, because I think the story is what connects people and makes people think that, again, the issue is actually palpable. The terminology may be off-putting. If people makes them feel uncomfortable, tell them the story of what's happening. I
also think that integrity has a lot to do with it. If people are just using someone else's word to make a point, you can smell that. You can feel that, you know what I mean? And you said these politicians, and it just occurred to me, there are so many politicians that I know that have been not only in politics 40 years, but in the same office for 30, 40 years. And so, when you're grabbing at straws to hold power like that, that is also part of the problem. Again, back when we got to learn some history, there were the gentleman farmer and the school teacher and these people who would run for Congress and be there for 8 years and then go back to their lives. It might be very different if those people used anywhere in the world because they were using their word from their community. But for career politicians to always have to figure out what are the people going to like, well, it's because they're not from the people anymore. Yeah, that is true. Well, that is a big LGBTQ story for today. There is no other queer nonprofit media platform like this in the entire world. Support our LGBTQ stories by subscribing to and sharing Queer News Tonight.